No infantry squad hiding on an objective will be safe. Don your servo harness and load the tremor shells, because today we're looking at the Thunderfire cannon. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, the tactics and strategy focused 40k channel, where we're looking at all things Space Marine. Now we might have finished Tank Week, but there is one other tracked machine in the Space Marine Codex that has the vehicle keyword, and of course that is the Thunderfire cannon. Now this little machine has been cropping up in a whole host of competitive Space Marine lists that I've seen recently. They can really help put the hurt on infantry squads from all the way across the battlefield, and their tremor shell stratagem can really come in handy against the right opponent. Thunderfire cannons are employed as a weapon of war by the Tech Marines, who might consider bringing one of these along to the fight if they feel that the chapter is needing extra firepower in a point defense kind of role. With 4 barrels, the Thunderfire cannons unleash a punishing volley of shots at an incredibly high rate of fire. Due to being smaller and more mobile than vehicles, they can often set up in terrain that vehicles can't traverse. So, what can these murder machines do for you if you include them as part of your army? A Thunderfire cannon is a heavy support choice for Codex Space Marines. When you buy it as a unit, you get the Thunderfire cannon itself and a Tech Marine gunner. When you set it up on the battlefield, you deploy them as 2 separate units within 2 inches of each other, and from there they operate as separate units. The caveat is that a Thunderfire cannon can only shoot if there is 1 Tech Marine gunner within 3 inches of it and operating the gun, and the Thunderfire cannons are automatically destroyed if there isn't a Tech Marine gunner within 6 inches of the Thunderfire cannon. So if the Tech Marine gunner needs to move away or is killed, then the Thunderfire cannon is instantly lost. At base, including the cost of the Tech Marine gunner and its equipment, the Thunderfire cannon will set you back 92 points for this model. So let's have a look at its stats. The cannon itself only has a movement of 3, a weapon skill of 6, ballistic skill of 2 up, strength 3, toughness 6, 4 wounds, 1 attack, leadership 8, and a 2 up save. The main things to note about this profile is that it's only movement 3, so once you've deployed it, it really isn't going anywhere fast. It is pretty much a static artillery piece. Also, its ballistic skill of 2 up, which it has because Tech Marines have a ballistic skill of 2 up normally, is very very good and better than most standard Space Marine shooting. It's a big factor when you compare it to, say, the Whirlwind. Thunderfire cannons are particularly less susceptible to modifiers, as they already start out with a ballistic skill that's so good. On the other hand, it isn't particularly durable. With only 4 wounds, toughness 6 and a 2 up save, then if you expose this thing to enemy firepower, you really run the risk of it being shot off the board with a couple of las cannon shots or similar. It's fairly durable to most anti-infantry firepower, but if your opponent gets to directly shoot the Thunderfire cannon, it will go down far quicker than a tank, for example compared with the Whirlwind that fills a similar battlefield role. Now the Tech Marine gunner has a similar profile to the standard Tech Marine. He has a movement of 6, weapon skill 3 up, ballistic skill 2 up, strength 4, toughness 4, 4 wounds, which is actually an improvement compared with the index version when he only had 2, and attacks 3, leadership 8 and a 2 up save. Now he's armed with a full servo harness, so he has a bolt pistol, flamer, plasma cutter and 2 servo arms. So as a little utility character, he's not too bad if the Thunderfire cannon does happen to be destroyed. He can unleash a reasonable amount of close range firepower and doesn't have an awful melee profile. So what about the stats for that gun then? The Thunderfire cannon is a 60-inch range weapon, so you should be able to hit anything on the battlefield, and it ignores line of sight, so you can target units that aren't visible to the bearer. It's heavy 4d3, so on average 8 shots, but it can swing a bit, strength 5, AP -1 and damage 1. Thunderfire cannons love to be in the Devastator doctrine when that AP -1 goes to AP -2. Strength 5 AP -2 weapons are a pretty nice all-round profile. They'll absolutely shred infantry, but even against the heaviest vehicles such as knights, you'll still be getting a decent amount of wounds through, as they'll still only wound them on a 5 up, and will do a decent job of pushing them down to their invulnerable saves. Damage 1 means it's only ever going to clip a few wounds off vehicles or hard targets any turn, but honestly that's better than nothing, considering it's a primary anti-infantry weapon. If the Thunderfire cannon is destroyed and your Tech Marine needs to go out and fight the enemy, then that plasma cutter is essentially a plasma pistol, but it's assault 1 rather than pistol 1. It's 12-inch range, strength 7, AP -3, damage 1, and when you supercharge it, it goes to strength 8, minus 3, damage 2. But obviously on a roll of 1, like all plasma weapons, it will kill the bearer. He has 2 servo arms. Each one of these will let him replace one of his regular attacks with a servo arm attack. So it's strength times 2, AP minus 2, and flat damage 3. So they actually pack a real punch if they do connect. Like Power Fists and Thunderhammers though, these are somewhat unwieldy, and they will minus 1 to the hit roll, so we'll be hitting on 4s with these. The Thunderfire Cannon and Tech Marine Gunner have no options, so you can't take any additional equipment on the Tech Marine. You can however give the Tech Marine a Relic or a Warlord trait, which is certainly worth considering if you have a Relic or a Warlord trait that just wants to be on the battlefield and kept safe at the back of your lines. Say for example, the Ultramarines Warlord trait that allows command point regeneration on a 5+, or the relic that the Iron Hands have, that is some sort of fancy helm that I forget the name of. The units have the Angels of Death special rule, so that will give them access to combat doctrines, where you really want the Devastator one to improve the Thunderfire Cannon, but the Tactical Doctrine will boost the ranged attacks of the Tech Marine if the Thunderfire Cannon does get destroyed and needs to go out solo. The unit has the Operated Artillery and Crude Artillery rules, which basically act, as I mentioned earlier, that a Tech Marine needs to be within 3 inches of the Thunderfire Cannon to allow the gun to fire, and the Thunderfire Cannon is instantly destroyed if there are no Tech Marine gunners within 6 inches of the model. And finally, the Tech Marine himself has the Blessing of the Omnissiah rule, so if you're within 1 inches of a friendly chapter vehicle at the end of your movement phase, then you can heal that vehicle for D3 wounds, which of course does work on the Thunderfire Cannon itself. So all in all, the Thunderfire Cannon is a quite solid damage output weapon that wants to be out of line of sight, as it has quite weak defense to shooting. It's great for hitting hordes and enemy units that are hiding out of line of sight without too much defense themselves. The Tech Marine can heal some nearby vehicles, and if the Thunderfire Cannon is destroyed, then the Tech Marine can go out and either fight with the enemy or help patch up other vehicles in your gun line. So what other ways can we use to get the most out of our Thunderfire Cannon? Firstly, as we said, we want to be in the Devastator Doctrine if at all possible to get that AP minus 2 on the main gun, and this immediately pushes us a little bit towards an Iron Hands list or a Iron Hands successor list. Maybe Imperial Fist at some stage too, but we don't know what their boosted doctrine is going to be yet. Iron Hands will allow the Thunderfire Cannon to reroll 1s, and also move that 3 inches without penalty, so a little bit of wiggling each turn to help reposition and hide out of line of sight. With rerolling 1s, the Thunderfire Cannon becomes ridiculously reliable, as it will be hitting on 2s rerolling 1s, so it should hit with all of its shots most of the time. A 6-up Feel No Pain doesn't hurt, and it could potentially be the difference between your Thunderfire Cannon living and dying if you get lucky. Other chapters include Salamanders, for having an extra reroll to wound is very nice, and the reroll hit and wound in both the shooting and fight phase is absolutely great on the Tech Marine Gunner, being a lone character with a powerful shooting attack and a powerful close combat attack. He could really turn into a bit of a surprise fighty character when your opponent thinks they've dealt with the actual main threat of the unit, which is the big gun. Imperial Fist is also particularly useful. Often the Thunderfire Cannon will want to be shooting at targets that are hiding in cover, so ignoring cover is great on that. In general, the rest of the chapters aren't that much of a big deal for the Thunderfire Cannon, but it does have a strong profile, and I could see nothing wrong with taking it in virtually any chapter. As per normal for Space Marine damage dealing units, they'll get a lot out of rerolls from captains and lieutenants. You won't generally need a chapter master for this guy because he's already ballistic skill 2 up, so a captain will be just as good. Any buffs to this sort of general purpose firepower that can hit anything on the board are very useful, as you can use these Thunderfire Cannons to focus down whatever is the biggest, most threatening unit to your army on the board on any given turn. Now, Thunderfire Cannons have an important stratagem that comes up quite a lot in Space Marine lists and is a useful tool in hindering your opponent's plans. Now, this stratagem is called Tremor Shells, and it represents the ammunition of the Thunderfire Cannon where they bury underground and then explode from beneath the earth, completely disrupting the opponent's movement. This stratagem costs 1 CP and can target one of your own Thunderfire Cannons in the army. Until the end of that phase, when you're shooting with that Thunderfire Cannon, it has a special effect when it's targeting anything that doesn't have the Fly or Titanic keywords. The Thunderfire Cannon's wound rolls suffer a -1 penalty, so if you were normally wounding on 3s, you'd be wounding on 4s, but in your opponent's next turn, they must halve the unit's move characteristic and halve any advance and charge rolls made for the unit. So essentially it's moving at half speed, and any charges will be a lot harder to get off, or flat impossible in some cases. Now this has really big implications depending on the list you're facing. If your opponent has any big strong melee units, they're trying to muscle up the centre of the board, say for example a massive army of plague bearers or lots of squads of orc boys, then you can target one of those units, and as well as getting some damage output, that squad will be going very slowly towards you next turn. Provided you're a suitable distance away from the unit, you can know that that unit is not going to threaten you in terms of charging into melee next turn, so you can ignore the unit and focus down all of the other more pressing threats in the army. This could also be incredibly useful on any big slow Death Star units, such as say Grotesques or Bulgarins, or any big slow non-Titanic walkers, say if you wanted to limit the movement of a Leviathan Dreadnought to hopefully get out of range of its guns. There are a lot of options that you can do with this, and not really much your opponent can do to stop this going off. As the Thunderfire Cannon has on average 8 shots, you only need 1 hit to connect with the unit, and that doesn't even have to wound to activate this effect, and it combos very nicely with the second stratagem, which we'll move on to now. Suppression Fire costs 2 CP, and you can use this on any Thunderfire Cannon that hasn't moved, and essentially this just gives you an extra round of shooting with that Thunderfire Cannon. Now this is pretty good just even without combining it with Tremor Shells. As you get a decent amount of damage output, you'll get another 4d3, strength 5, hopefully AP -2 shots, which could be enough to just finish off that enemy unit on an objective that wouldn't have died to 1 round of Thunderfire shooting, or you can just put in a lot more work trying to strim out a horde that's coming at you. It's always good to have the option to trade some CP for damage output if needed, so this one's always worth bearing in mind if you have a Thunderfire Cannon. If you do happen to combine it with Tremor Shells though, that will be a total of 3 CP for 1 Thunderfire Cannon, but it means that you get to shoot with this thing twice, and it will slow 2 units in the way that we mentioned before. Now this could be incredibly punishing, say if you used it on 2 big horde units at the front of your opponent's deployment zone, because those units can only move a very small amount next turn. They might well just block all the movement for the units behind them, thereby slowing down your opponent's entire army. Obviously this isn't going to come up every game due to the Flying Titanic keywords being hard counters to the Thunderfire's Tremor Shells, but against the right list this could potentially be game changing or game winning, as it could give you an entire extra shooting phase to destroy the enemy's army before it reaches your lines. For this reason, among others, a Thunderfire Cannon is certainly a very competitive choice in a Space Marine army, as they're reasonably cheap, add good utility, and have the potential to win games in the right circumstances when fed a few CP. So let's get into how I would field one on the battlefield then. I could honestly see the appeal in adding anywhere between 1 and 3 Thunderfire Cannons. Just having 1 will let you do that stratagem combo, but having a whole 3 of them will really let you put an enormous amount of hurt on enemy units hiding back in their deployment zone. Thunderfire Cannons have a really decent damage output, and their huge range and ignores line of sight means that they can damage whichever unit is most threatening or most needs to die in the turn in the whole enemy army. So if you wanted to use 3, I wouldn't see anything wrong with that, and it might make it easier in terms of putting a lot of overlapping buffs, such as giving them a captain and a lieutenant to reroll all those hits and wounds. In deployment, you really want to keep the Thunderfire Cannon out of line of sight if your opponent has any ranged firepower at all. At only 4 wounds with a 2-up save and toughness 6, they're really very squishy in comparison to most things that cost a similar amount of points, and I can guarantee you to feel very unhappy if one just gets shot to death by a stray Eldar lance weapon or similar. If you're the player who gets to choose their deployment zone, you should certainly consider selecting one with a large line of sight blocking piece to hide any Thunderfires you have in. If you get very unlucky and there is no line of sight blocking terrain, it would be pretty reasonable to set the Thunderfire Cannon up as far back as you possibly can to hopefully outrange most of the enemy's anti-tank. That 60-inch range covers most of the board, but do bear in mind that you won't be able to reposition this guy very far later in the battle, so if you do absolutely need to get some shots on the enemy's backfield objectives, then it might be worth measuring out the 60-inch range and making sure that they are just in range to kill the troops that they need to. Like I said, hopefully these guys will be out of line of sight in cover, but if you're not able to make that happen, consider using the prepare positions stratagem to turn that 2-up save into a 1-up. Position them around any captains or lieutenants you happen to have brought in for them, and from there start to go to town on the enemy army. Certainly consider using tremor shells and suppression fire. Turn 1 against opponents that have susceptible units that are worth slowing down. I won't labour the point on those stratagems as we've already been over them quite in depth. And otherwise you mostly want to be shooting this at targets that you'll be wounding on a 3-up, so toughness 4 and below, to get the most out of your cannons. Depending on the game, however, you might need the extra firepower of the Thunderfire cannons to shave the last few wounds off a dangerous vehicle or other threatening unit as the game dictates. If your Thunderfire cannons take damage, then the Tech Marines can help repair them, so don't forget to do that each turn. And also don't forget that the Tech Marines can also fire off all of their weapons in the same time that a Thunderfire cannon shoots if the enemy happens to be very close indeed. If you have other vehicles, then it's worth positioning them near the Thunderfire cannons so they can take advantage of the Tech Marines' repairs should they get damaged. You need to consider the screening of your Tech Marine gunners as well. If they get sniped, or if your opponent has enough space to, say, fly a flyer over and land right next to them and kill them, then that will be a far easier way of killing the entire unit, as they only have to go through 4 toughness 4 wounds, and that will kill both the Thunderfire cannon and the Tech Marine. You should always try and make sure the Thunderfire cannon is closer to the enemy than your Tech Marine is, and you should make sure that the enemy can't drop in reserves or flyers behind the Tech Marine to take him out. You really don't want him dying first, as it will make you unhappy. If the worst happens and the Thunderfire cannon itself bites the dust, then you need to think about how you can get the most use out of the Tech Marine. If you just need a little bit more damage output, you could think about advancing him towards the enemy army. As he's a character, he might be hard to target, so you could put him on a backfield objective, and whatever squad was holding that objective can advance towards the enemy to do more damage. Otherwise, he could go and repair your vehicles, or perhaps just lurk in cover to avoid him becoming a victory point for the opponent in a kill point mission. I quite like him, as there are definitely options that you can use with him, and I'm sure there will be games where he surprises you and accomplishes a decent objective, or kills an enemy unit that your opponent really was not expecting him to. Now, the main competitor to the Thunderfire cannon is the Whirlwind, and I think that the two are really quite well balanced indeed. The Thunderfire cannon gives you more strategic options with those tremor shells, and I'd say it has a very slightly higher damage output on the whole, due to that 2-up ballistic skill, and usually being AP-2 on those strength 5 shots. Also, if it dies, that Tech Marine gunner could be very useful. However, it is a little more expensive. It's 12 points more than the base Whirlwind with Castellan missiles, and 7 points more than the Vengeance missile Whirlwind, and it is also significantly less durable. The Whirlwind is a tank that is durable enough to leave in line of sight, and it won't matter too much. It has a nice amount of wounds and toughness 7, so your opponent will have to commit significant anti-tank firepower to kill it. The Thunderfire cannon just isn't something you can do that with, and if you put it in line of sight, then your opponent really should be shooting it as soon as he can, because it is a lot more efficient in terms of damage output than it is in defense. Whirlwinds also have a much greater movement capacity, so they could potentially have the ability to rush over and claim objectives, or get out of harm's way if the enemy gets too close. All in all, there's pros and cons to using both units, and I think that they're well balanced. I've seen both Whirlwinds and Thunderfire cannons used to good effect on the tabletop. If you'd like to hear a bit more about the Whirlwind, then I have recently made a video as part of last week's Tank Week, so feel free to go and check that one out. I'll leave a link down in the video description if you'd like to. I'm looking forward to recording a bunch of new Space Marine unit reviews this week. I think that the next review that should be released will be the Repulsor, and if I have time I'll try and get the White Scars Codex review out in the next few days as well. As always, thanks for listening to Auspex Tactics. I'll see you guys in the next video.